Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll tell you about the amazing internet speed record that was recently set by researchers, the backdoor built into Samsung's network printers, and a very clever hack against home routers, plus a big batch of your questions, our answers, and so much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 86 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on November 29th, 2012. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com, which I am a personal fan of. And of course, my name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the professor, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, man. Welcome to episode 86. You slipped in just as the episode started. You're like, you've become like one of those big-time radio hosts. I don't know if you ever watch live streams of like the big guys, but like they don't even like sit down in their chair until the music's like already playing them on air. You're like that guy today. You just like, you sat down. You're like, all right, let's do a show. And it was like, okay, but you just sat down. Are you sure? But you're a trooper today, Alan, because can I tell people what you're doing, or do you want to keep that?
Sure. It doesn't matter.
Well, I think we might have mentioned it on there, but yep. Alan is in the process of buying his first house and going through all of that. If you've ever gone through that out there when you're buying a place, you know, like the inspection stuff and just all of the paperwork and all of the people you got to talk to.
Yes.
If
you thought you did a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, well, no, unfortunately, Angela did the paperwork, not me so much. You got a binder there. That looks like a monster of a binder. Very nice. Well, Canada's making sure you cross all the T's and dot all your I's.
Well, that is just a relatively expensive house inspection report.
Oh, yeah.
That includes basically an encyclopedia about anything that might be wrong.
Very good.
But also includes a bunch of other stuff and so on.
All right, well, we got a big show today. In fact, we have a few stories that I really want to get to. Before we get rolling, I just want to remind folks that this show is brought to you in part by just yourselves. If you want to continue the support of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows during the holiday season, just remember our affiliate links located at the bottom of the site. You click there before you shop, and you help us out, like at Amazon, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy. We also have a browser extension that does it automatically. All right, Alan. Why don't we get to our first story? Because I think there's going to be a lot of geeks out in the audience that are like, I want this at my house so badly. Right?
Yeah. Although you can't have it at your house exactly.
I know. All right, well, what is it?
So a few universities worked together and set a new world record for internet transfer speeds at a conference in Salt Lake City. So they managed to get 96 gigabits per second on a disk-to-disk transfer.
Wow.
And achieved a memory-to-memory transfer of up to 339 gigabits per second over the internet. So the demonstration was live at this year's Supercomputer Conference, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah. Huh. It was a collaboration between the University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, the California Institute of Technology, and the University of Michigan, plus a bunch of other companies and universities in more minor roles.
So is this just to kind of prove they can do it?
Yeah. But basically, they set a record last year, and they broke the record by almost double this year.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
But yeah, it's basically testing a bunch of the different components of the system. But it's, the idea is to figure out what it takes to be able to send 100 gigabits per second over the internet so that, 100 gigabit per second Ethernet connections can become standard.
Yeah, baby.
So for the disk-to-disk tests, they were using IBM's X3650 M4 servers, which is, fairly standard server. Each one of those servers had a 40 gigabit per second Mellanox Connect X3 Ethernet card. So that means each server could do 40 gigabits. And each server also had 16 of OCZ's Vertex 4 SSDs, split 8 each onto 2 different 8-lane PCI Express RAID controllers.
Okay. So, yeah. Well, you put that many SSDs together, you're going to get a good performance.
Yes. And then each of the servers' NICs was connected to a Jupiter Juniper MX480 with some QSFP plus optics so that they could do the 40 gigabits. And then that Juniper was connected via 100 gigabit per second LR4 CFP optics to an optical management engine. And then would transport the data over Canary, which is a Canadian research network, and BCNet, which is a British Columbia specific research network, to Seattle. And then at a data center in Seattle, the circuits were connected using Internet 2 at its 100 gigabit SDN network to get it to Salt Lake City.
Huh.
So basically, the Canadian research networks peer to the U.S. research network Internet 2 at Seattle, and then they push the traffic down to Salt Lake City where they could do the demonstration live.
Wow, I can't even imagine the type of applications and research that could open up when you could even start to approach standard transfer rates of this.
Specifically what they were looking at is stuff like physics research. Things like the Large Hadron Collider generate huge amounts of data, and they can't get it. They can't push that data to the universities fast enough for them to start analyzing it as quickly as they're making it. So the University of Victoria found that it took about 4 of the IBM servers to be able to saturate the 100 gigabit link. Because each one could theoretically do up to 40 gigabits, but in order to reliably saturate the 100 gigabit link, they had to use 4 servers. Although Caltech managed to achieve an 80 gigabit per second memory-to-memory transfer using a single server that had 2 of the 40 gigabit interfaces, meaning that they were able to use nearly 100% of the server's interface speeds on both ends. So they had 2 servers, each with 2 40 gigabit NICs, and they managed to almost max out the 80 gigabits of theoretical capacity between the two. But that was using the Remote Data Memory Access over Ethernet protocol, which I've never heard of before. But transferring data between Pasadena, which is in California, and Salt Lake City, they managed to sustain about 75 gigabits per second with a CPU load of only 5%.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess that's because the controller cards and whatnot are handling a lot of that, right?
Yeah, they have their own processors on them. Because, like you see a lot of gigabit or 10 gigabit NICs that are using a lot more of your CPU to do that amount of traffic.
Yeah.
But, these NICs are expensive.
Yeah.
So there's a YouTube video that kind of talks a little bit about the background and even more about the hardware and has pictures and everything. There's the official website from University of Victoria is the link for the story, but at the bottom I also have links to the sites from Caltech and the University of Michigan, because they each have a little bit of their own information plus some common stuff. There's a bunch of graphs and stuff. You can see the actual transfer speeds over time and as they tested different things. As I mentioned, the tests made use of Canary, which is a Canadian research network, BCNet, which is another, and Internet 2. I have links to the websites for those, and they kind of explain about those projects and what they are and how they work and so on. The biggest one, Canary, which is the Canadian Network for the Advancement of Research, Industry, and Education, originally started out in 1990 as a 56 kilobit uplink cross country. And then in 93, it was up to 10 megabits. 95 was about 20. And then it got to 100 megabits of aggregate capacity in around 96. And then it kept growing. And now it has capacity between 160 and 320 gigabits.
Wow. I love it. I was just going through the. We already have a few title suggestions. I think maybe I'm just thinking of like a Doc Brown play on the gigawatts. This is just so much bandwidth. I don't even think I can comprehend. It's kind of like when you tell me, "Oh yeah, that's $1 billion." My brain knows the number, but that speed just seems so far out there. At least for anything I'll ever get my hands on. But for researchers, I suppose it's something they're going to actively work towards.
Yep.
Wow. Any other thoughts on that?
Nope. I have a link also to the press release from Caltech, which has a bit of information as well.
Cool. All right. Well, you can find links to all those in the show.
Yeah, the official one from University of Victoria has most of the technical detail you might be interested in.
Yeah. I was showing some of that on the...
It was very interesting to see that they could actually max out the 40 gigabit NICs because you always wonder about the interface speed. Like if it's a PCI Express, are you going to be able to push 40 gigabits into the network card?
Right.
And basically, I've used a couple of 10 gigabit NICs before and not had much luck maxing them out. So definitely interesting to see.
All right, Alan, we'll talk about maxing things out. I got something that just needs to stick in everybody's brain. Tech 295. Tech 295, what's that? It's crazy, you guys. GoDaddy.com, TechSNAP sponsor, is selling domains. This is I've never heard of a .com this cheap. $2.95. $2.95 for a .com, for a few .coms too. You can get like 3 of them.
Yes, you can get up to 3, which I think last time they had a sale, and it was like, what was it, like $7 or $5.95? I think it was $5.95 last time.
Right.
And I think you could only get one. And if you wanted more, they were closer to the regular price.
I mean, $2.95 for a .com if you use our checkout code TECH295. $2.95 is crazy. And think about this. I've mentioned it before, but GoDaddy has the mobile app for Android and iOS and maybe a BlackBerry. Anyways, this is when you have it this cheap. This is the perfect time to have that app, because if something strikes your fancy...
Well, because not only that price, you can basically buy the 3 that you're limited to for the same price you'd normally pay for 1.
Right, and it's cheaper than like a decent app. I mean, $2.95 is absolutely a steal. So use our code TECH295 when you check out. And also, if you just want to support the TechSNAP program, just clicking that link and visiting our sponsor supports the show as well. So please consider doing that. But really, go get that mobile app so that way when the inspiration strikes you at $2.95, why not just use the code TECH295 when you check out? And thank you to GoDaddy, who has had a string of amazing deals for the TechSNAP audience, and we really do appreciate that. And I gotta say, Danica called into the Linux Action Show last weekend. So if you haven't caught that, she had a few comments on zombies and the upcoming zombie apocalypse. So go listen to last week's Linux Action Show if you want to catch that. But the deal is here. First place we aired it on the network, Tech 295, to get a .com for $2.95. That's crazy. Yeah.
You get up to 3 for that price, and then beyond that, I think there's $7.95 or $7.99,
which is still a great deal. Which is
still cheaper than the regular price.
Yeah. And the
so even if you need a lot of them, you should start using it soon.
Yes, because the offer will expire at the end of December. They're obviously not going to do that one for very long. Right. All right, Alan, why don't we go to our next news story? What is the next story?
Yes. So Samsung printers, specifically the more enterprise type network managed printers ones, contain a hard-coded admin account that cannot be disabled at all.
You cut out for a second. A hard-coded admin account?
Yeah, a hard-coded admin account that you can't disable.
So it's a backdoor. It's a backdoor, basically.
Basically. Many Samsung printers and also many Dell printers that were manufactured by Samsung, because Dell would just stick a Dell logo over the Samsung logo, contain a hard-coded full read-write SNMP community, which is basically a way to monitor and manage a server, or in this case, a printer. But SNMP, or Simple Network Management Protocol, manages pretty much any device, whether it's a switch, a router, a printer, a computer, or whatever. But even if you go into the printer's control panel and completely disable SNMP, the normal SNMP that you set up is turned off, but this full admin one is on still.
Oh.
And you can use it to reconfigure the printer and possibly even do remote code execution on the printer to, install malware on the printer or something, which means you could then eventually maybe intercept documents as they're being printed. Well,
and actually people might be kind of laughing right now, oh, Alan, that's such an exaggeration, but I actually was doing a paid audit. I wasn't like being Mr. Black Hat. I came in, I was doing an audit of their network, and if you can compromise JetDirect, so I would assume it's the same with these Samsungs, there's actually on some of these JetDirects a full Linux environment, and then you can put an SSH server on there, and then you can actually, we've talked a lot about island hopping before, but sometimes printers have exceptions through firewalls. Sometimes printers are just in a great position to exploit, and it sounds funny, but it's actually very viable.
If you think you're going to set up your network and you're going to, all right, the people in this room are low security people, they're on this network, and then we're going to have this high security room where only certain IP addresses or whatever are allowed to access anything in this room. But someone in that room might need to print, so the printer is going to be allowed through.
Yeah.
And then if I compromise the printer, I can then hop from the printer into the secure network.
And the other thing that's tricky about printers is high traffic loads to and from printers is not particularly unusual. So sometimes certain thresholds don't get triggered. It's actually kind of a great attack avenue.
It is. It's quite a good vector. And yeah, so like we said, it's great possibilities for island hopping there.
And so it's great they just built this in. What the hell?
I have a link here to US CERT put out an advisory about it. Samsung says that the vulnerability is no longer there in printers manufactured after October 31st of this year. So any printer that they built in the last month, which probably means you can't buy one that doesn't have this yet. They're still, making their way through the supply chain. And they plan to come up with a tool that will allow you to fix this sometime in the future.
Oh.
But at the moment, there's no way to fix it.
Yeah, and if they have printers...
but they're going to come up with a tool at some point.
Who knows what firmwares they'll... Yeah, I mean, who knows? And you could have printers that have this vulnerability.
Right. That's the other thing is the string for this admin community that's built into all these printers has been found in the firmware dating back as far as 2004. So,
oh, jeez.
A lot of these printers are probably end of life by now. And it's like, is Samsung going to make a tool to fix these? Do they have firmware to update these to?
And there's proof of concept code out there.
At least some of it, yes.
Yeah, for the SNMP aspect of it, it looks like.
Yeah.
Which, great.
Yeah. So just for a comparison and kind of an idea of what you can do, in previous attacks against HP printers, like you were talking about, researchers were able to do a bunch of things, including make the printer overheat to the point where it was like emitting smoke.
Oh, geez.
Of course, a thermal override kicked in the printer and turned the printer off at that point. But,
good.
That's still enough you could scare people pretty good. Or intercept documents as they're being printed. I think in one case, the HP people managed to get copies of tax documents as they were being printed over the network.
Oh, well, that's no big deal, really.
So, if you can imagine, some big corporation or whatever, and you compromise the printer and get copies of every document they make, then you might get all kinds of useful things.
Jeez.
Especially, if it's more like an engineering type place and you get access to like one of their plotters, one of the large form factor printers.
Did I miss? Has Samsung stated why this exists and why this was done? Has that been covered?
It doesn't really say.
No word from Sam. Just built in this backdoor admin account and built in backdoor SNMP services. No explanation.
Maybe it was there so that
so they could be
if you
super
disabled
shady?
SNMP, you could still re-enable it somehow.
It wants me to take a port scanner to my devices that I buy. And I just want to nmap everything.
Yeah.
All right. Wow. Well, that's interesting. Now, links to that, and Alan actually has several links to a couple of different follow-up stories too.
Additional stuff, and someone has made a full what do you call the things for SNMP?
The traps?
Definitions.
Oh, yeah.
The MIB, an MIB list for the Samsung stuff, which I think includes some stuff for playing with compromising it and so on.
Oh, really? Good. All right. Well, now this next story always worries me because I'm a WordPress user. Is this something I need to worry about, Alan? What's going on here?
So Piwik, I think is how you pronounce that.
I think so,
Piwik, which is a open source website analytics software. It's kind of like a open source version of something like Google Analytics that you can run yourself so that all your data is owned by you still, not by Google. They run WordPress on their site, and their site was compromised. And through the compromise, someone injected malware into the latest version of their application. So anyone downloading it would end up with malware on their web server.
And this is tough because it can happen. They don't even know it's happened because if it's using, it's not like it triggers some sort of alarm on a server somewhere.
Right. So Piwik's site was compromised via a vulnerability in some WordPress plugin that they use. They didn't say which, or if it's something that was already fixed and it was a widely known vulnerability and Piwik just didn't update, or if it was a new vulnerability, or what.
The article speculates that there was a flaw in WordPress automatic update feature that enabled attackers to inject malware into the PHP files.
Right, although I think that was just
speculation.
More for color. It's like, in the past there have been problems like this.
Yes.
So it was probably something along this line, not that it was this specific issue.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But specifically, if you downloaded PWIC 1.9.2 during specific hours on November 26th, but I would say any time that day, especially with time zones and so on, then they have instructions in the official security advisory for checking a specific file to see if your copy contains a bunch of backdoor code. And if it does, they have instructions on what you should do to clean it up.
Okay. I've had to recover a WordPress install from this kind of thing before. And the nice thing about WordPress a lot of times is you just get that version. You just extract the file.
All you really need is the config file in your database, right?
Yeah. So just keep that all backed up. And any theme tweaks you do.
But in this case, they're talking about the PWIC software, not WordPress.
Oh, right. Yes, right. Okay.
All
right.
But it's mostly the same idea.
Any other thoughts?
But yeah, that one, it exposes the problem with regular, just like an MD5 hash for verifying a download. If it's just an MD5 or an SHA-256 hash of the file posted on, say, the website, then the attacker, after they modified the downloadable file, can just edit the page to post the new hash as well, right? So if you're looking at the official pwic.org website and you see, here's the download for version 1.9.2 and here's the hash, you download it, you check the hash, it looks right, you think you're okay. But you're really not, right? Because the attacker added a malware to the archive and then just updated the hash. And that's why we should be using something like GPG keys and signing the archive, right, with a signature file, and then you can verify that against the public key, right? Of course, that requires that you make sure you get the public key from somewhere trusted, and you kind of end up with the same problem in the end. That's why the way the FreeBSD port tree does it is nice, because the list of hashes comes from the ports tree, not from where you downloaded the file.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So they're coming from the maintainer of the ports tree, and so you're verifying it that way. Mm-hmm. And those updates are delivered to you securely with PortSNAP usually,
right,
or from SVN.
Interesting, Mr. Allen.
Yep.
All right. Well, this next story might be the case somebody needs to. If you ever been in an argument convincing maybe a novice user why they need to change their default router password, now we've got an excuse. You can just tell them about this story, right, Alan?
Yes. So a researcher has developed a rather clever attack against users who don't change their router's default password or use a weak password.
Which I got to imagine is the bulk of people who just buy it from like their local store or something like that, right?
Well, and part of the problem is the fact that routers ship with a common default password. Like my router has a sticker on it where it lists the username and very complex random password.
Oh, this is such a this is so. Oh well, see, so now this is newer. Some of them are doing that, but the older ones, it's so common that when I go to
there's a website that has a giant list of them,
and
which is very handy because when you go to the house of some person that hasn't changed their password, and you're like, oh look, you have a Netgear. I wonder what the password for that is.
That's
Netgear such and such a model.
Netgear default password, and then you log in. Yeah, it's nice in a way.
And if it's not admin password or the brand name, then you're like, oh.
Oh, got to reset it to default.
I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah. If it's not online, then I just reset it. But yeah, it's almost always in that database. All right. So, of course, somebody's going to take advantage of this, right?
Yes. So this attack is based on the fact that many of these routers have very simple web interfaces. Like some of them, it's a stripped down Linux running like a Perl web server or something.
Right.
Or just a simple one written in C or whatever. But it means that they usually don't differentiate between a GET and a POST. When they're interpreting the web content. So what that means is normally, you log into the web interface and you want to change, say, the DNS servers, you type it in, you hit submit. But if that interface can also be done with a GET, then there's just basically a long URL you can type out that will say, change settings.cgi and DNS1 equals blah and DNS2 equals blah and submit equals blah or whatever, right? And that accessing that URL will change the DNS servers as if you logged into the interface and hit submit. Right? So, and the other thing is that most routers use HTTP basic authentication, right?
Right.
Where it pops up that regular username and password box.
Right.
You can avoid those ones by typing, http://username:/password at IP address /URL. So basically, this attack takes a bunch of those URLs with, common router IP addresses like 192.168.0.1 and 1.1. So
yeah,
the default you find, there's 2 or 3 maybe that 95% of all routers, like home gateway devices, are going to use.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you take the common usernames and passwords, multiply that by the common IP addresses, and multiply that by a couple of common models for the URL structure. Because even a bunch of different models probably use the same web interface, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you just take a bunch of those, and then you embed these in an email as either a 1x1 pixel image or an iframe. And basically, as soon as the user views that email, it's going to try to load those images, and it's going to hit the router each time. And if one of those username and passwords works, and the router understands the URL structure and applies the change that URL submits, then you've now infected that router. In this case, the attack is change the user's DNS servers to be some specific rogue DNS servers that redirect all your traffic to one specific place, right? And it basically allows the attacker to do a man-in-the-middle attack on you. Because they say, all right, you try to go to Google, I'm going to give you the wrong IP address for Google and send you to my web server that maybe proxies you to Google and steals your password in the middle.
I love it. In this video demonstration, they have a picture of a little kitty.
And the other thing is, once you change the DNS server settings on the router, that usually propagates to all the devices on your network via DHCP, right? Next time each of those devices renews their lease, they're going to get the new DNS servers. And then all those devices will then be using that. Or depending on the router, some routers will, via DHCP, broadcast the router's IP address as the DNS server, and then the DNS will have a little DNS forwarder, in which case the change is applied immediately. But yeah, it allows the attacker to do a man-in-the-middle attack, and if they use something like SSL strip, basically, unless the site is protected by the new HSTS protocol, which we'll talk about later in the show, and we've talked about a couple of times recently in the last few weeks, which is basically a header the website sends. It says, this site will always have HTTPS, and your browser remembers that for some amount of time, usually a month or so. Or, for example, Firefox is now seeding a list of websites that will always have it and can never have it disabled.
Right.
Unless you have that protection, then the SSL strip will just change all the URLs as the traffic is coming to you to say not SSL. And then maybe if the site actually requires it, it'll do the proxying on its side. But it means that, you know, if you go to your bank and you don't notice that it's not going over SSL, then you end up with all the man-in-the-middle person who infected your computer and has your computer using their DNS servers can now redirect all your traffic to their server and spy on it as it goes through.
Right. Watch everywhere you go, every DNS query it makes.
But not only that, because they could return invalid results for the DNS queries, they could redirect, say, all your traffic.
Right.
Right. You try to go to Facebook and it'll send you to his server and then bounce you to Facebook. But write down your username and password in between when you get prompted to log in and such.
It's, you know, it's not a new concept, but doing it at the router level is extra, and it's very kind of clever, but so obvious in some ways too.
And so there's a live demonstration video here where he does it to an iPad in a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds even.
Because it's just
like it starts out showing how he wrote the Python code that sends the email, and then, but basically the main problem is that many Apple devices automatically load remote images without asking you first.
They just, HTML emails, no problem. Opens it right up.
Whereas most email clients like Thunderbird or Outlook, or even webmail clients like Gmail, require you to click a button first. The first reason for that is the way spammers used to tell whether an email address was active and whether the email was being read or not was to include a little 1x1 pixel image that would call back and say, hey, somebody opened this email, right? And so the spammers would use that to know that you actually read that spam email and that they should send more spam to that address, right? So then Outlook and Thunderbird and Gmail implemented this feature where it doesn't load the remote content unless you click, so that those images aren't invading your privacy by telling somebody whether you open that email or not, right? It doesn't give the emailer information whether you read the email or not, unless you specifically click because you want to load the images. But Apple devices will load them automatically without asking. And so in this case, if you load one of these malicious emails on your iPad or iPhone or whatever, it'll change your router settings. and your whole network is now vulnerable.
Another good reason to run pfSense too is because obviously pfSense wouldn't fall down to this because you have your own pfSense password and all of that.
Yeah, exactly, because you're going to set a proper password. And because pfSense, I'm pretty sure, uses a proper like a cookie authentication rather than just HTTP basic, so it's harder to spoof this way.
Right. Yeah. All right, Alan, but boy, so that maybe if you're going around during the holidays to families' houses and just try to go to the router. If they have a default password, talk to them about it.
But yeah, so the biggest thing about this one is it doesn't require the user to do anything.
Right. Well, except for not change the default password. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if they don't change the default password, but basically if they open this email, or depending on the client, even just preview it, then their router could be compromised, and that's it.
Yeah. It could even be. It doesn't even have to be an email. It could be a link that gets sent to them on Facebook. I mean, it could be anything, right? Yeah.
But in the demonstration video here, it's a fancy HTML email with a picture of a cat. It says, "Hey, look, this cat is cool." And then across the bottom, you don't see it, but it's hacking your router.
Yeah. It's not a nice cat.
And so the other thing is, even if you have Thunderbird, Outlook, Gmail, or whatever that's not loading the images automatically, if you open the email and it's supposed to have a picture and you're like, oh, all right, I'll look at the picture. Right? If it looks legitimate and you want to see the picture of the funny cat, you click, then it loads the images anyway, and you end up being compromised as well.
Man. All right, everybody. Passwords.
You know, this guy's attack is basically he targeted some ASUS routers because that's what he had at home to play with.
Yeah.
But, you know, this could easily start targeting every other type of router, basically.
All right, Alan. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Change your password and even if you have to change the password, but you also have to change it to something that isn't very common. Because this attack could easily have 100 of those URLs, so they could try all kinds of different passwords. You know, we've talked about on TechSNAP before, like the top 50 passwords that people use over and over again.
Right.
Right? Like just using somebody's first or last name, especially first name, definitely a no-no.
Not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is cool that he demonstrated it from an iPad too, because I think, you know, there's sort of this conception of that sandbox protection or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, the iPad is putting your entire network at risk.
Yeah.
All of your devices, not just the iPad.
You got to figure Apple's got to make that a setting in the future, right? I mean, that just seems like
it's just for your privacy, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to open these emails and they know whether you read it or not. Because
I thought it was a setting.
Spammers are using this. They're called tracking cookies.
It's silly. I mean, yeah, I never load images ever. I never load images ever. All right,
unless, sometimes this is the newsletter from an ISP, and I actually want to see what they're saying, so I click load images. But other than that, I'm like, I don't ever load the images without asking me first.
Right, exactly. Yeah, if it's a newsletter, I'll load it. It's in the newsletter. People know I opened it and stuff like that too. Well, Alan, our next story probably applies to a lot of our viewers because they're GoDaddy customers, and there was what I believe was a phishing attempt going around online trying to get GoDaddy customers to compromise their account. Because
GoDaddy is so big, like literally bigger than the next 10 biggest .com registrars put together.
They're a target.
They're the easiest target, right? If you spam every domain on the internet with an email that pretends to be from GoDaddy, like 60 or 70% of them are actually going to be from GoDaddy.
Yeah. I think it's a similar problem that other companies have.
Like in the States, when you're doing like a fake email from a bank, it's very hard to determine what percentage of the people are actually going to have an account at that specific bank.
Right.
With GoDaddy, even from Whois records, you could tell whether the domain's at GoDaddy or not.
Yeah. Yeah, you can script that. You can totally script that.
Not just that, you can just totally spam it out there, and more than half the people are going to actually be using GoDaddy.
Especially when they have $2.95 domains. That's crazy.
Yes.
Tech $2.95.
So GoDaddy's Director of Information Security Operations, Scott Gerlach, talked to reporters about a rash of GoDaddy customers whose sites were being hijacked. Basically, attackers would send out phishing emails that would convince the GoDaddy customer to log into some site that wasn't GoDaddy and enter the username and password. Once they'd done that, the attackers could then use that username and password to log into the actual GoDaddy and add malicious DNS records to the user's domain, so that when you tried to go to their website, instead of going to their website, you'd be redirected to some other site. In most of the cases, they were redirecting to the cool exploit kit or some other type of ransomware that would try to like lock you out of your computer unless you paid them $50 or, other malicious things. So they did the DNS records. And so GoDaddy kind of detected the trend there and started seeing, all right, this is the DNS records that are the signature for this attack. And so they reset the passwords of all the customers who were affected and saying, you fell for a phishing scam, you're going to need to set a new password because otherwise, if the bad guys still have your passwords, even if we fix your records, they're just going to break them again.
Yeah.
GoDaddy also recommends if you're from the US or Canada, you can enable their new two-factor authentication through your cell phone. They basically, I think it's a text message based one. So it's only available for US and Canada for now. But maybe in the future, they'll also offer international two-factor authentication.
That's something I should check out.
Yeah.
I wonder how they do that. I'll look into the
two-factor. You enter your phone number, and they'll send you a text with a code when you try to log in kind of thing.
I'm going to check it out. That's a good idea.
I forgot to include the link to it, but there's a link to it in one of the two links I included in the show notes. So one of the two news stories has a link to the GoDaddy page of two-factor authentication, or I'm sure you can find it easily on the GoDaddy page under help.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually grab a link for it for the show notes.
All right.
And then I have additional coverage from the next web has some extra information about it.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Because at first some people thought it was a problem at GoDaddy, that GoDaddy was compromised in some way, but GoDaddy's confirmed that it's not. It was just some users that fell for a phishing scam.
This happened, the other big one is, I remember, was iTunes. But people were sending out blanket emails saying, you need to log in here to reset your iTunes password. And then people were logging in, and they were resetting their password, and then it was capturing the credentials in the background, logging into the iTunes store and buying a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
So, because iTunes is so huge that there's a good chance that a lot of people that are going to be clicking on emails like that have iTunes accounts. Not being judgy or anything.
It's why we might consider, as the internet as a whole, to start stepping up our use of like domain keys and signing emails, so that their source can be verified better.
Yeah, sure.
It's we're working on that at Scale Engine at the moment to add domain keys for our emails.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, there you go. That's all the news, and you can find links to all that stuff in the show notes, which is over at Jupiter Broadcasting. You can just find TechSNAP86, scroll down past the video. We actually get asked often where the show notes are. If you see the video embed and you see the download links, just keep scrolling. You see the links to everything.
Yeah, and you'll see like 5 or 6 pages of text. That's me writing show notes every week.
Yeah, you're a machine. All right, now with all that done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the very, very top of our website up in the right-hand corner, or starting a thread in our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan, before we get to the emails, you had a really cool tool you wanted to share with folks. It's kind of a follow-up to some things we've talked about on the show, too.
Yeah, it's called CryptSync. It's from the group that does Tortoise SVN, which is a Windows SVN client. It integrates all the stuff you would need to do with to manage source code in SVN into the Windows browser, or like Windows file browser interface. But yeah, it's called CryptSync, and it's basically what it does is it automatically encrypts the contents of one folder on your computer into another directory. One use of this allows you to automatically it allows you to automate the process of encrypting files before you send them to a cloud storage provider like Dropbox or G Drive or SkyDrive or whatever.
Sure.
So you have one folder on your computer where you put all your files that you want to go up there, right? And they're just regular files there. And then CryptSync, which is running in the background, will then encrypt each of those files separately and drop them into your Dropbox folder or your SkyDrive folder, or even 2 of them if you want to store it in 2 different places in case one of them goes out of service someday or something. Mm-hmm. Then you can set it up with the same source for both and 2 different destinations. So basically, you set up Dropbox, and you have a Dropbox folder wherever, and then you set up your source folder somewhere else that's not under Dropbox, and then you just say, "Hey, CryptSync, sync everything from this folder to this subfolder in my Dropbox but encrypt it first.
And it
with
does it
this
both
password.
ways? So if the file in the Dropbox updates, would it pull it out and decrypt it, do you know?
I think so. I think
'Cause
so.
you could run that
You'd
on
have to read
multiple
the tool.
machines.
Right. You have to read the instructions. I didn't get into it that deep.
Okay.
But basically, the files are encrypted using 7-zip so that you don't have to have CryptSync to recover the files.
Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's really nice.
Plus, it compresses them first, which might save you some space and bandwidth.
Yeah, and that's good. When you're saving it to storage, you have to pay for.
Yeah. And so basically, it's just taking each file you put in folder A, 7-zipping it with a password, and dropping it in folder B, which then gets synced to Dropbox.
I like that, Alan. That's really cool.
yeah.
CryptSync. It looks like it's available for Windows.
Yep.
Link
And
to it in the show notes.
you can run it all the time, or you can run it kind of on demand. It's up to you. And then you can recover the files without using the CryptSync tool as long as you have the password that you use to encrypt the 7-zip files. CryptSync can also encrypt the file names of your files, since those could give away, if it's, Alan's Taxes 2012, then that kind of tells you what it is right there, right? Or, there might be other information in there somewhere that gives away information you don't want people browsing through your Dropbox to be able to see. So you can have it encrypt the file names, although that makes the file names longer. So you have to make sure that the original name is short enough that the resulting name is less than 120 characters, because that's the Windows limit. But
It's
anyway.
GPL. It's GPL. It's Windows only, but it's GPL. And if it's sitting on top of 7-zip, which is available for Linux
Yeah.
and FreeBSD.
I think basically the reason it's Windows only is because it would have to hook into the Windows File API to notice every time a file was changed.
Makes sense. Which there are facilities for on other platforms too.
Yep. And the other disadvantage to encrypting the file names is that if you're trying to open them manually with 7-zip, it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
Because the files just have random gibberish as their names.
And you'd also probably want to be careful of what you use it on, because you're going to lose sort of the bit level synchronization that Dropbox is capable of, because every time you rev a file, it's going to be re-encrypted and re-zipped. So it's going to look like a totally new binary to Dropbox. So it'll move the whole file every time.
Yes.
But if you're doing that with docs and and spreadsheets and things like that, you probably don't care.
They're tiny, so it probably doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if it's something large, you could, the idea here is that you do it with maybe a subfolder of important stuff for Dropbox.
Yeah.
And if you just have a bunch of pictures that you don't care as much about, you can just put them in a different folder in Dropbox that isn't encrypted.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's exactly how I'd probably use it if I ran Windows.
Yeah.
But I might look into that's a good idea. All right. John writes in with our first question of the week with an age-old defrag question. I don't know what it is about defrag questions. I just love doing defrag questions over the years. I don't know. It's like this is the big thing that Windows users worry about, I think, sometimes.
I remember when I had a Windows server, I had fancy defrag software, and I had my hard drive defragged by the modification date of the files, so that files that never change were on the fast part of the drive. And files that change a lot would be at the end, so they wouldn't fragment as quickly.
So John writes in, and he says, I installed an SSD on my work laptop about 8 months ago, and I'm running Windows 7 Ultimate. He uses it for work. And as expected, it was a screamer, talking, a minute maybe for the restart and everything to get running again. And it lasted for a while, but recently it slowed to a relative crawl. We're now talking 2 minutes to boot, and things aren't as fast, quote unquote. Still, it's very much workable, and I was thinking of reinstalling Windows to get a fresh start. A guy at work told me to defrag it, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. He convinced me to analyze it with Defragler, and it saw 61% fragmentation. He said, okay, it makes sense. It's a small drive. He moves and makes a lot of files and deletes them afterwards. So he went ahead and ran the defrag, as he wasn't too worried about the drive's life, and reinstalling Windows has a lot of rights to it as well, so he figured it was kind of a lose-lose. And he said, but guess what? It worked. He's back to great speed. He said he decided to try it on his home server after detecting 43% fragmentation, and it's now performing a lot better. What's your take on this? My understanding of technology says that it shouldn't matter. Have you, / are you willing to defrag an SSD and of course, keep a backup? He, by the way, was a Kingston Hyper X 3K 120 gigabyte SSD.
Okay.
Love the show, and he uses our extensions too.
Right. The very first thing I was thinking is it maybe a hybrid drive, not an SSD? But
No.
Apparently it isn't. It could have to do with the trim support, because if you're not having that, it could be a problem. It could also have to do with the sector sizes. If your sector sizes aren't aligned with the SSD sector sizes, then the fragmentation can actually become an issue because you have to read different cells to read the files. But more importantly is when you write, because basically if you're writing half of a cell in the SSD, you have to read, right? If you're doing a write that is halfway between two cells, then you have to read all of both cells and then rewrite everything into both cells.
Huh, now this is
right.
interesting.
You can't only rewrite half of a cell, so you have to read the whole cell, including the part you're not changing,
right,
and then write it back down, the part you're not changing, and then the part you are changing,
right.
And so that slows it down. But really, you shouldn't have that problem if you had formatted the drive originally so that the sector size was aligned with the blocks on the SSD.
The thing about drive fragmentation is it very literally plays into how a spinning hard drive works and how a head going across this hard drive works. Whereas an SSD, it can access different parts of the drive at the same speed of everything else. But
there's still a seek time. It's just hundreds or thousands of times faster, so you don't really notice.
What I find interesting is Sai in the chat room has pointed out that in Windows 8, they've changed it when you have an SSD drive, 8 detects this, and then it changes the words from defrag to optimize, and then it trims the whole drive. I haven't tried this myself, but that's kind of interesting. I have read from people who seem to really know their stuff about SSDs, like they look at them, really like down at the cell level of an SSD drive. They swear up and down that you shouldn't need to defrag. I wonder if he hasn't discovered, well, quote unquote discovered, something just the way the NTFS file system works and how it maybe wants things contiguously. Maybe that's more of what's going on.
A little bit maybe, and it could have to do with the QDEFs and a couple other things, but I'm thinking it probably has more to do, the fragmentation shouldn't ever affect your read speed, but it may affect your write speed. And so defragging might make a difference there.
Oh, interesting.
But mostly I think it has to do with whether his operating system there is supporting trim or not. Because if not, then
7 Ultimate should. It does.
Right. Yeah. I missed the part.
Maybe it depends on the drive too. I don't know what the circumstances.
Yeah, and it might depend on a bunch of different things. But
maybe if people know,
I've never noticed that with my SSD. Mine's been fine.
I think mine slowed down. I don't know so much. SSD is so damn fast, it's hard to tell. I do know that on my Windows 7 systems where I've done a RAID 0, and it's just like a screamer at first, I definitely, it's actually the machine that you're Skyped on right now, I definitely notice it is way slower than it used to be. Like, when I first set it up, I was like, who needs SSD? I got a terabyte of capacity, and I'm RAID 0. I'm flying. And now I'm like, I got to format this box. It is too horribly slow. So there is something...
And I think that might have to do with trim and stuff as well, though.
There is something about Windows that just slows down over time. And I remember, you might remember too, that when Windows first announced and it came out that it was going to have a registry, some of the tech pundits at a time said, this is a conspiracy from Microsoft to intentionally slow down the PC over time so that customers are forced to upgrade. They're in cahoots with the hardware OEMs. And there was this big brouhaha about the scam of the Windows registry. And you almost wonder if maybe they're right, because it does slow down.
Honestly, I had a Windows XP installed for like 4 years that didn't seem to slow down to me. I was perfectly happy with it.
It wasn't like that.
It's like, and then, sometimes I had to reboot after 2 or 3 weeks because
it was?
A bug with the amount of resource space, but I found a registry hack that fixed that.
The machine was 100% rock solid performer for a long time until Jeremy was out here after shows, in the post shows, installing games all the time. Every night he would be installing a new game.
I think part of the reason is I almost never install crap on my computer. I have a virtual machine where I use if I need a piece of software for 10 minutes, not on my machine, on a virtual machine.
Yeah. Well, and the final nail of the coffin is then and I've removed all of this, but Brian installed Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio. Jeez.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And I removed all of it, but it's still like there.
Debugger into everything that you didn't want there, and
I don't know what's going on.
down.
All right. So why don't we get to Sebastian's email, because he has, this is kind of thick.
Just the last thing on defragging. Yeah. If you have an SSD, it probably doesn't hurt too much to defrag every once in a while, but make sure you don't want to have the scheduled defrag once a week or whatever that Windows wants to do by default. Right? If you defrag twice a year or when you notice a specific problem, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it won't kill you. But doing one every week could be really bad for the lifetime of the drive.
All right, so I'm thinking Sebastian's moving around millions based on the steps he's taken with this email. All right, check out this process here, Alan. He says, first, I have a little praise. He says he's listened to several different podcasts in the past, but once he discovered TechSNAP, he stopped listening to the other podcasts, and now he listens to TechSNAP whenever he can, including the back catalog. So it's fun to listen to some of the old shows, big shows as you refer to them. Big, big shows. I don't think
you've ever called it a big show. That's nonsense.
No. He says, I have two questions. I would like to use online banking as safe as possible. So I would like to set up 2 instances for use on different occasions. One will be a live USB, and another will be a virtual machine on VirtualBox, so I can reset it every time, so you'll do snapshots. My bank uses personal digital certificates and passwords for signing in, and I don't know how to install digital certificates onto a live USB. And which OS do you recommend for the live USB and the VM machine? Linux, FreeBSD? Which one has the smallest footprint on hardware? In short, I would like to have a very small, very fast live USB and VM machine only for online banking with digital certificate and the possibility to print an expense list, a PDF, things like that. Thanks so much. Keep up the good work. And that's from Sebastian. Now, IRC chat, maybe you guys can start giving some ideas here. So there's utilities like UNet Bootin that he can write the USB disk or drive. That's probably, and then just boot into it, and then it's read write. He can save the certificate, and it'll save.
Yeah,
forever.
and there's a bunch of stuff like that. For the personal certificates, it depends what kind of certificate they are, but most of those would be installed in the browser, and so you'd probably just have to load it each time.
Yeah, unless you took a snapshot.
Basically, it depends if you have persistent storage or not. If you do, then you can just load the certificate as part of the browser. But then there's a USB stick laying around that has your certificate on it. Right?
I would probably go for the USB stick. I would probably go. This is just a long shot. I would probably do an Ubuntu Live CD just because in UNet Bootin, it's just like right there in the list. You load the program. You don't even have to go to Ubuntu's website to get it. You just select it and it just downloads it. But B, if you do end up dealing with, and this is a long shot, but if you do end up dealing with tech support, there's a chance they'll have heard of Ubuntu before.
Right.
So that's one thing to consider. And for the VM...
Like we talked about a VM where he would not save state at all, the issue with that is your browser's going to get out of date. And you want to always be using the latest version so it can't be exploited.
Everything, yeah. Damn small Linux would be another minimal footprint, of course. There's a lot of mini Linux distributions out there. FreeBSD, PCBSD might be your best bet if you're not familiar with it.
Make a version that you can run off a USB stick.
I don't. It seems like a lot of effort to have 2 different environments, and it's 2 different things you have to keep up to date. It's 2 different.
You have the personal. If you have the personal certificate, then your bank's doing a pretty good job there. You just want to make sure when you import the personal certificate into your browser, you set your browser to require a password to be entered before that certificate can be used.
What about
that certificate is basically encrypted on your computer, and when your bank wants to see the certificate, you have to decrypt it with a password, and then separately a different password to enter your username and password to log into the bank. And then you basically have the certificate protected by a password, and so you're using the certificate and the password.
I wonder if you could do something like set up a USB thumbstick, put LastPass in there. LastPass supports 2 factors, so he could get to his password vault, and he could store information in that. Chrome has print to PDF built into by default, so if he uses Chrome, he's got that. And then if he could just get there are a lot of utilities to take an image of a USB thumbstick, and then he could just store that and then reflash the thumb drive, eliminate the 2 separate environments, because I think that VM is just going to be, or the thumb drive, having to do both of them. One of them is going to get out of date, and that's going to be your vulnerability. And you could also always boot the thumbstick in VirtualBox.
Yes.
So you could use it physically on a machine or run it inside VirtualBox, and there's some guides online on how to do that.
Yep.
And then keep it up to date. Keep it patched.
Yeah, the most important thing is keep it patched. And if you can reduce the attack surface by having as little as possible in that VM, right? If you just have the browser and the personal certificate and nothing else, and you don't go to websites other than your bank, and you're using, you're sure using the correct canonical URL for your bank every time, not a Google search or something, then you're pretty good. I remember somebody at the college decided they were going to download VLC to run something on the projector screen at the college, and they Googled for it instead of going to videoland.org, and the first search result is an advertisement for somebody's modified version of VLC that has a bunch of ads and stuff.
That's bogus. That sucks.
And it's like, well, shame on you for clicking on that instead of the proper URL. It's like, surely you should know how to use Google by now.
Yeah.
Right? You don't. It's
how
like,
they make their money, man.
What percent of the time do you need to click on the ads? Is 0? Right? Yes. If it's the right result, it's probably going to be right there in the organic results. You don't need to click on the ad. But anyway, it's probably with the personal certificate. It's probably not that necessary to have all this, but if you want to have a VM or a USB stick live CD to do it, that'll work. The best ways to keep it secure are to run absolutely nothing on it that you don't absolutely need, right? Which is like the browser with, say, no Java, no Flash, unless Java maybe is required by your bank, but then, right? So no add-ons or plugins or anything. Just
maybe
the base browser and the operating system, and keep them up to date, and no frills at all, because every one of those is expanding your attack surface.
Maybe he should just like Samsung or somebody just put out like a Chromebook. It's $200. Just only use the Chromebook for banking.
Yeah.
Doesn't run anything but a browser. I don't know. All right. So Josh sent in an email, Alan, and I'm going to try to sum it up a little bit. He's got a home server running FreeBSD that has ZFS on there that he's using for storage. He's also got a Myth box, and he wants to turn on the Myth web interface where you can like watch some of the TV streaming in the library remotely by visiting the page. But here's the problem: he wants to do it securely because he's going to be giving it out to his brother who's in the service, and he thinks his brother's going to share it. So he wants to take some precautions. He says, my initial thought was to set it up in a jail and then install Linux server in that jail with the Myth backend and Myth web so that the Linux server is somehow compromised. The core system is not. Is this a sound strategy? What would you recommend for me being able to share live TV but still keeping my system locked down if the information gets shared out? Are jails the way to go? Is there a comprehensive guide to setting them up securely? I'm still very new to FreeBSD, switched about 2 months ago after going back and watching some older TechSNAP episodes, so I'm still learning. But I'm trying to read at least a chapter a night from the handbook. I'm also studying up for my RHCSA, so some nights I'm just too tired. Love the show. Watches TechSNAP and Last primarily. Just recently got into Coder Radio, so now he needs to go check out Unfilter, SciByte, and VoShow. It's convinced me to make a career change, and hopefully I'll have a certification in a month or two. Now I just have to find a new job, and then I can donate to JB. All right. So what do you think, Alan? Do you think he should throw this in a jail on his...
securely differently than I thought he was at the beginning of the question. At the beginning of the question, I thought he just wanted to control access to the Myth service or whatever. Right. In which case, possibly, if the Myth service doesn't provide strong authentication already, then you could do something like an Nginx reverse proxy in front of it that only does it over SSL and then HTTP basic authentication. So, or HTTP digest or whatever kind of authentication you want to do. Mm-hmm. So you have to so you're logging in over SSL with the username and password, and then it's connecting to the Myth TV for you. Although I don't know that much about the Myth web interface and how that works. But it seems he's more interested about somebody compromising the Myth box.
Possibly, yeah. I almost wonder if he has an extra box just to throw it on that, or do a full VM.
It sounds like he has it on a separate box right now, right? Because it's a Linux thing, and he was talking about trying to do it under the Linux in a jail.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if it's a separate machine, it's no more vulnerable than running it in a jail. The jail just means if it's compromised, it's isolated to that jail. Well, if it's a separate machine, it's isolated to that machine, and it can't get out any more than it could from the jail, right?
Right. It could still bang on your other boxes just as well as it could bang on it from... Yeah.
So if it's already a separate box, he doesn't need to try to move it to a jail. If he wants to, he can try. I don't know how well it'll work, especially since if it's... specifically, if he's talked about doing live TV, so if he has a TV capture card or something,
that's the other sticky
probably
part.
Not a driver for that for FreeBSD.
Yeah,
there's very limited support for those.
And how would that even work if there was in a jail? Can you assign any arbitrary hardware device like that to a jail? Could you say take this capture card and?
Don't know about that, and even if you're doing Linux in a jail, it's not a real Linux kernel, so you can't load a Linux driver.
Okay, good point. So he's got the home run tuner and the HD home run tuner. I'm not sure if they make a FreeBSD driver for that. I would say, he's already got it isolated on its own separate box. The more kind of precautions he needs to take are probably more at the firewall level or an Nginx level, like you said.
It's just controlling access to the application. Yeah. And the best way to do that is if the Myth box doesn't provide secure authentication, or if you're just worried that there'll be some bug in Myth that somebody will be able to bypass that authentication, is put it on an internal IP that can't be accessed from the internet, and then have Nginx sit in front of it facing the internet and only let people through if they have a username and password that's on Nginx's list.
The other note,
and you could also choose to do SSL with either your own certificate or buy a cheap certificate from GoDaddy.
Oh, there you go. And go 20 off 6 to get 20% off that. The other thing that I might note is...
Or actually, I think if you check last week's episode, there was a sale that goes on until tomorrow.
And so go check the show notes for that.
On SSL certificates.
If he is genuinely worried about security, he mentioned he was going for a Red Hat cert. I'm all about when I fall in love with a new platform, I want to do everything with that new platform. I want to replace everything, and I really am like that. But if you really are worried about security, one of the best things you can do is stay what you are familiar with, because you know how to lock that down. You know how to install things properly so they are secure. You know what accounts should be there by default,
update it and so on.
You know how to update it really. I mean, you just know it through and through, and you're able to keep it more secure. So if you are genuinely worried about security, you always should go with the platform you're the most comfortable with, in my opinion. All right, Alan, I got an interesting question that came in through the TechSNAP subreddit from Spleem. He says, I was wondering if, as Alan said, a hash takes 0.1 seconds, wouldn't that mean that your server's CPU is running at 100% just for hashing? So when 10 people log in per second, you have 100% CPU for that long of time.
Yes, that'd be on one core, though, but yes.
Or, Mr. Allen, if you have something that needs a lot of memory, wouldn't that mean that you would run out of RAM? Will we get DDoSed by password logins? Is that an actual problem? And how do you manage that?
With the bcrypt, you can turn that knob up a lot. Like during our while playing around in a lab with it, I did one. I think if you use 13 rounds on a Core 2 Duo, it holds one core at 100% for 13 seconds. Whereas if you do it one less, because it's logarithmic, it takes like 1.2 seconds.
So if you do have thousands of users logging in, like Facebook.
Right. So basically, you have to decide what level of that stretching algorithm makes sense for you. Right? You can set it to 7 is fairly good. You might want to look at 8 or 9 now, but basically, you try different ones and see how long it takes. And, you figure, all right, this is the most users that are ever going to try to log in at once. This is the most amount of CPU I want to spend on it. What stretching level comes up to that number?
Right. And then you just make that call.
The whole point about these hashes being adjustable is that you can make them cheaper if you're running into an issue because you have thousands of users logging in all the time. Or you can take it up if you have very few users logging in, but you need more security. But really, the idea with having settings that go that high is that in the future, when computers are 100 times faster, having an algorithm you can set to 150 times harder is very useful.
Yeah, because they won't get out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In the future, that will be a good thing.
So it wouldn't break your box, but yes, if you turn it up too high, it will make everything really slow. Mm-hmm. But that's why it's a tunable, Almost every tunable, like when you're tuning an operating system, you can adjust all kinds of things to the point where they'll break your machine.
And we see a lot of people who try to balance this. What they do, like people have to scale, is they break all the authentication stuff out to its own set of servers. So the database servers are not doing the authentication, and the web servers aren't doing the authentication. They offload that to dedicated hosts who are like the gatekeepers.
And depending on the algorithm, sometimes there's you can use a hardware security module to do some of the work.
Yeah, get that accelerated. Those are always nice and expensive. All right. I didn't get to all of the emails this week because I was running around just before the show too, but this last one put a smile on my face, so I tossed it in here. It came in from Nate, and he says, "Hey there, guys. I've been watching TechSNAP for about a year now, and I've been meaning to subscribe, but never got around to it. My wife and I watch the faux show as well, and I try to catch last once in a while. I'm occasionally in the chat room as IN8 as well. Just wanted to let you know that we had some big items for Christmas presents this year, and we made sure to tag the session with our Amazon affiliate link beforehand. Best wishes to you and yours. Keep up the great content and keep it coming. I really look forward to your shows every week. Thanks." Well, thank you, Nate. I just wanted to say, as the holiday season approaches, we really do appreciate people using the affiliate links, and thanks for letting me know that you are doing it. It's good to keep getting the feedback and all that. So, all right. If you'd like to get your question in, if you didn't hear it, if you did send it in and we've missed it for a couple of weeks or something, send it again. Yep. I want to get it on the show. Email us TechSNAP@Jupiter Broadcasting, or the most popular way, you can go to Jupiter Broadcasting. At the very top right corner, there's a contact link. You click that, and then select the TechSNAP show comes into us. But with all the emails done, that must mean it's time for the TechSNAP roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to follow up and read a little more on your own. And a lot of them are provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Mr. Allen, are you ready for the first Roundup story this week?
Yep.
This one's got a lot of people worked up. Some flavors of SOPA rage here. The European Parliament has a
basically they've passed a resolution to condemn the ITU, which is the International
and
something
the International Telecom Union, and the U.S. has also done the same.
Yes, because basically the ITU is a UN organization that's trying to assert control over the internet. They're trying to centralize all the rules about the internet. And, there's much concern that will give China and Russia too much input and so on.
Russia
Google came out against this earlier, and now the EU is saying that, yes, we're not for this either.
Russia has submitted actual policy proposals to sort of restructure the way domain name management is handled and restructure the way content management is done. So Russia's got some very, very, very aggressive proposals that they're going to be talking about at the ITU, which kicks off next week. And also the ITU has proposals for putting tariffs. So essentially local ISPs in countries around the world would charge for transit along their wire. So like a company like Google, or maybe even a company like Scale Engine, as you're distributing around the world, as you pass over a local ISP's infrastructure, they get to charge you for that. And that would take some pretty significant changes too.
And that's basically the wrong way around for how the internet's designed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The internet has a fee structure in place, and it's proven that it works.
Right. And
trying to charge Google twice it doesn't make any sense.
This would also sort of restructure the way the web is sort of managed. So this ITU meeting, it's interesting. I don't know how much is actually going to come out of it.
Scary is what it is. And
very
I'm glad
scary
to see governments standing up and saying, no, we're not going to do that. That's silly.
What's really interesting, and by the way, this is going to be this is going to be our entire second act on tonight's Unfiltered. So episode 27 on Unfiltered is going to be, the entire second act will be about this. And one of the things that's interesting is Forbes this week had some leaked documents from the ITU, and they're already actively engaging in what they're calling trying to prevent an ACTA/SOPA-like scenario where there's public backlash, where the public puts pressure on countries' governments to prevent this. So they're actually organizing social media efforts and things like that to try to change perception about this, and they're actively denying different things, but the documents have leaked. It's not good, and it would be a significant change, and that's why major companies are now coming out trying to stop this, as well as major governments. So we'll see what happens. But
and if a bunch of major companies and governments are trying to stop something, sometimes you're like, oh, well, then we probably want that. But in this case, not so much. No.
Well, and the UN is trying to play it up as well. So their message is literally, we need to make the internet available to everyone. And right now, it's controlled by a few super economic powers, and we need to take that power and make it available to everyone, which is such crap. It's just crap. So that's got me all fired up, Al. It's got me all fired up. You want to know something else that's got people fired up? It was an Azure outage this week. Microsoft's Azure suffered a pretty substantial 9-hour outage.
Right, that's their cloud service, kind of like Amazon's.
Yeah, exactly. There are various different infrastructures there, and they had a networking issue at one of their data centers. And they were all over pretty quick, but it still took them 9 hours to get everything working again. So,
it heavily affected the U.S. West Coast region.
Yeah.
That was just that's where a lot of people use Amazon. Azure.
Michael Dominic on our Coda Radio show has talked about he's tried doing some test development and deploying on Azure. And, there's some nice stuff. Like, I guess Azure ties in pretty good with some third-party services and whatnot. So it's not all bad. All right, Alan, you got a story here about Bluetooth detection. What's going on with this one?
Yes, the city of Calgary in Alberta is on Monday started using the publicly broadcasted MAC address of Bluetooth devices to track travel times and estimate traffic along highways. So basically, if you have a Bluetooth device, it broadcasts its MAC address out, which is what it's supposed to do.
Right.
And basically, they have little radio listening antennas along the road, and they be like, okay, this MAC address was here at this time, and then it was here at this time and here at this time. Therefore, it was going, this fast.
And they don't know who that belongs to.
Right. They for privacy reasons, they don't try to correlate.
Okay.
First of all, you can't easily tie a MAC address back to a person unless you get that data some other way.
Right.
And so in this case, they're purposely keeping it anonymous. Just they're like, all right, this MAC address moved from here to here to here at this speed, so therefore, the traffic along the road is probably about that speed. And then the more people that have Bluetooth devices, the better samples they get. Because they purposely have to filter out people that might be driving near the road, but not on that specific road. Right, because Bluetooth kind of has this smallish, but
it's like, what, 30 feet? Is that what it is?
Right, but you can get the signal could
bounce around or whatnot.
Well, it could leak further because 30 feet or whatever is how far the signal can go and still get back to the device that sent it for a reply, right? But when you send a broadcast, it goes a lot farther than that.
Right. Yeah.
So you can hear the broadcast of the MAC address a lot further away than you can actually communicate back and forth with.
I've noticed that. Yeah, I've noticed that. It's annoying.
And
actually.
so, so they have to do a bunch of stuff to filter out, people that say, driving under the highway on a bypass or whatever, or people walking that have Bluetooth devices or walking along the street.
Yeah.
And so on to eliminate those so that it doesn't say there's really bad traffic because there was a couple of people walking with Bluetooth.
You got to have enough data points to average them out.
Yeah. And, you have to be moving at least this fast, otherwise we won't consider your data. But anyway, they have signs along the highway that estimate what the speed is for the next section.
That's cool. That's a neat idea. I don't really have much of an issue with this, as long as they're keeping it anonymous.
Right. Well, because they don't have a way. Like, it's kind of technically impossible to, unless, they somehow register devices to your identity.
That's smart, actually.
And that'd be kind of hard to do.
Everybody's got a smartphone now, it seems like.
I do, but I don't have any Bluetooth devices, honestly.
My car is a Bluetooth device.
If my phone might broadcast something, even if I don't have a headset. But
my car broadcasts itself as a headset.
Right. I know in Ontario it's illegal to use your cell phone except for with a hands-free device in the car. So.
All right, Alan. Now, this next story, it reminds me, I always know that my son Dylan has done something wrong because it often goes like this. He'll come up to me and say, Dad, I didn't eat Abby's cookie. And then I know that he ate Abby's cookie, right? Well, so sort of along those same lines, the U.S. government has come out and said, we didn't attack France with malware. I don't know if it's like that, but it kind of ring that kind of tone with me when I saw this headline. So what's going on here?
So specifically, they said that they didn't use the Flame malware to spy on some government advisors to the French president, I think former French president now. So yes, on on Slashdot they were talking about so what malware did you use instead of Flame?
Because they actually specifically said, no, we didn't use Flamer. No, we didn't use Flame. No.
Yeah.
No, Stuxnet. No. Well, that sounds like that's actually what I'm going to read after the show, because I wonder why the U.S. would even be accused. I mean, did they detect Flame virus there?
Well, because remember, I think they detected a specific one like Flame or something.
Okay.
And, the U.S. is like, we've never admitted that Flame was us.
Right. Don't ignore those comments in there. All right, so now this next story just gets me all excited, Alan. HTTP strict transport security.
Yeah. The Internet Engineering Task Force has approved HSTS, which is the HTTP strict transport security, which is what I was talking about before. It's basically a header that sites like Gmail will admit to your browser saying, hey, remember for the next 30 days that Gmail will always have HTTPS. And then your browser remembers. The reason it has an expiry date is so that someday you might be able to not have HTTPS without a big security warning if you didn't want for whatever reason. It makes that part is more for smaller sites that might change something at some point. But it's a protocol where a site will say, we will never have mixed content. There will never be anything on this site that isn't HTTPS. And that's now been ratified as a standard, RFC 6797.
Oh, man, it just rolls off the tongue, 6797. Oh, yeah, I know that RFC. It's all good. All right, Alan. Well, this one's interesting. I saw this one bouncing around our subreddit.
Well, somebody in the chat room was just talking about, if it has an expiry date of 30 days, although you can, the website decides on these expiry date. So Google could set the expiry date to be a year. And so a man-in-the-middle attack would have to go on for a year removing that header for the whole time without you ever getting that header again from Google before it would expire. Also, browsers like Firefox and Chrome are now going to have a certain list of ones that are set to never expire, are hard-coded. It's not so much that the expiry that they're worried about in the browser, it's the fact that when you first install the browser, you don't have a list at all.
Right.
So if the man-in-the-middle attack is going on as soon as you start your browser, you never get the headers in the first place. But sorry, it's not an expiration date, it's a time. So every time you visit Google, it ups when the expiry date is to a year from that day. So it'd have to be a year from the last time that you got Google without a man-in-the-middle attack, which I imagine would be sufficient.
Yeah. Next story?
Yep.
All right, this one was bubbling around our TechSNAP subreddit. Fake Windows 8 key generators found tricking users. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. So is this the one where people thought they were activating Windows 8 and they ended up getting themselves screwed, like with malware?
Yeah. Basically, you remember how we talked about last week or the week before, Microsoft made a gaffe where they gave away a license key for Windows Media Player, but it actually allowed you to activate Windows 8 as if it was the Pro version. Mm-hmm. Well, in what we call trend jacking, somebody glommed onto that and released a keygen that claimed to do that, but actually just infected your machine with malware.
Oh, jeez. And I guess some people took some issue with the way we covered how the activation works on that. I guess you still need to use somebody's illegitimate activation server to still make that work, but that didn't seem insurmountable from what people were saying. I didn't quite follow it because I don't... What is Windows 8, like $40? I mean, that doesn't seem actually unreasonable for an operating system, if you're going to buy Windows 8. All right, Alan. Next story?
Yep.
This one kind of fits with that. I just tossed it in here towards the end because it looks like the Windows 8 store has been quote-unquote cracked. I think a lot of us probably figured this would happen. It's not the crack in the traditional sense. This is a little side-loading crack that allows you to load Metro apps that are not yet approved for installation from the Windows Store. So this could be a way some people are speculating to sort of slipstream. You can buy trials in the Windows Store, and then you might be able to use this to convert those trials to full versions without actually paying. So that's one angle of the exploit. But kind of like, how Android, out of the box, you can only install applications from the Android Play Store. In Android, however, there's a setting you can turn on side loading. That setting actually doesn't exist in Windows 8 for Metro applications. There's no, you don't just download a Metro application and install it like you do with regular Windows apps. You have to get it from the store. This workaround sort of, and I have figured when Microsoft would build that in for enterprises. I was not surprised to see this.
Concerning that they don't.
It almost seems like it's a feature requirement that enterprises would have to have because an enterprise isn't going to want to put their Windows app in the store. But I guess the crack's been out for a while. And it's been modified several times to actually make it quite nice. Mm-hmm. So there you go. It doesn't take long for that stuff to get cracked, no matter how they try. All right, Alan, well, I think that brings us to the end of our show this week. Yes.
Yep.
All right, well, here's the details, folks. If you'd like to watch TechSNAP live and take part in our chat room, and you also get probably about twice the show because we have chit-chat in between the segments, like Alan was giving us a tour of his new laptop bag and his new laptop during one of the segment breaks. So yeah, I always encourage you to join us live. You get more show. If the big show's not long enough as it is. That's over at jblive.tv on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Boom! There you go, folks. And you can also stream the audio at jblive.info. And if you want to hear more about that whole ITU shenanigans, be sure to check out this week's episode of Unfilter. We'll have that in there. And I should mention, just as a plug for last this week, we're going to talk about Proxmox. I don't know if you're familiar with Proxmox at all.
No.
It is it's a bare metal virtualization platform that has a paid and open source edition. It's right up there competing with VMware ESX and the big dogs and Citrix's commercial Zen solution. It is a monster. I'm going to review it on this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. It all runs on a Debian base. And
nice.
So check out last this week to catch that. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.